Join me on my Instagram account Rana Safi on the 20th of May at 5 pm as I talked to Moin Mir about his fascinating book Surat, Fall of a Pot, Rise of a Prince. We all know the doctrine of lapse, but did you know that it was tried first in Surat? Moin, a descendant of the Nawabs of Surat and the Darbar Sahab of Kamadia, takes us through this fascinating journey of Mir Jafar Ali Khan as he managed to fight for his daughter's inheritance in England in the company's headquarters, appealing against the perfidious company to the British Parliament and enlisting clever British politicians and legal brains for his cause, and winning it. We will also talk about the impact of the great uprising of 1857 on the cities of Surat and Shahjahanabad, where the Mughal emperor was ruling in name. And जाने कहाँ गए वो लोग, जाने कहाँ गए वो दिन, आंखें तरसती हैं. Now they've made it slightly different from what it used to be earlier. On Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and thanks to William, I met you on one of the chats that you were having. So wonderful, and thank you for joining us today with your.
No, not at all. Thank you, Zarra Nawazish, and thank you for having me with you. You're one of India's shining luminaries in history. So it's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you so much. So, who is it? Moin, so proud of you. Miss your our days in Mumbai. Yes. And आपके कोई दोस्त हैं शायद नईम.
अच्छा, क्या नाम था? Sorry, I missed
Naeem Khan.
Naeem Khan. Oh, yes, of course.
So, as you know, today we will be discussing books. Moin की बहुत ही fascinating किताब है, which I just finished reading last week. Surat, the fall of a pot and the rise of a prince. And it is, in a sense, autobiographical because he has written about his own ancestors. So, and I always feel if you write about अपने ancestors के बारे में, if you write yourself, that feel and that empathy and passion that comes, and of course the knowledge that you get from the family, that can't be beaten by any other biographer. So मोइन की वो किताब है, आप लोग जब भी लॉकडाउन खत्म होए किंडल पे ले सकते हैं, या आप जब लॉकडाउन खत्म हो, you can buy the physical copy from Amazon or any bookshop. And now today the theme of our talk is going to be 1857, and in light of the ramifications and the legacy of 1857 and the great uprising and the policies of the British before and after that. तो मोइन, मेरा आपसे एक ये सवाल था कि the unfairness of the East India Company is the leaf motive of your book. That's the first thing that hits you to any reader who reads the book. So apart from affecting the Surat royal family, how much do you think that their policies affected the common people of Surat?
जी शुक्रिया. Firstly, thank you so much for having me. और मैं बहुत शुक्रगुजार हूँ for to all the viewers as well. Thank you for taking the time and joining Rana Appa's wonderful live. Rana Appa, I think one must understand that when the East India Company went for the royal family of any state, it was a very well thought out strategy, which meant that if they took out the top line of the state, which was the royal family, inevitably the state would be affected. But with Surat, it was actually quite different, because while that was the overarching strategy, they had already started, in the pursuance of their objective to destroy Surat as a port and build Bombay. So to answer your question, it was a strategy whereby they would build Bombay as a nemesis to Surat, lure away the merchants towards Bombay, provide them with a narrative, which was actually a very faulty narrative, but communicated brilliantly by the English, which was that we will provide you naval protection in the port of Bombay. And as a result of that, come to Bombay and trade and abandon Surat. The ramifications of that were detrimental to Surat because Surat felt the heat. Surat felt, the constant pressure of the English East India Company officials to take the merchants to 150 miles south into Bombay. And all of this began in towards the late 1600s, and if memory serves me correct, I'll have to refer my book, but I think it's 1680s when they actually moved their headquarters from Surat to Bombay on the western coastline. And from then onwards, it's this constant tug of war between Surat and Bombay. Surat is being championed by the Nawabs, and Bombay is being championed by the East India Company. And the result was as I mentioned, detrimental, because not only did they pull the merchants towards Bombay, they also, did everything in their power to prevent the trading from happening. So in 1774, the English East India Company shut down the mint in Surat, and mint was where the coins were manufactured under the imperial seal of the Mughal emperor. Of course, there were other parts of India where the mint also was very much prevalent, but the mint in Surat was shut down in 1774, and the reason was that they wanted to push trade into Bombay, and also the bribing that was taking place by in Surat, because the English East India Company officials had already taken the castle, was astonishing. So, for example, a merchant, to actually get his ship out into the sea to trade, he had to pay half the income that he got to the English East India Company officials purely in terms of bribes. So, to answer your question rather succinctly and concisely, the ramifications on Surat as a trading port were deadly. In fact, I kind of in my book am quite scathing of those attempts to destroy Surat's trading prowess. So besides the royal family, the merchants of Surat, really took a harsh beating at the hands of the officials.
So these are things which I think most people who are viewing our program today, we talk a lot about the North, but the effect on, and even Bengal, but the effect on places like Surat and Bombay, we very rarely talk about. So in that way, your book is an eye-opener for many people to know what was going on in Surat. And again, as you've said in a couple of your talks that I've heard, you talk of that the doctrine of lapse was first tested in Surat itself. So that brings me to another question, that what do you think that if Bakhtiarun Nisa had been a boy and not a daughter, would they have let her succeed or him succeed, the father? Or do you think that they had their eyes on Surat anyway, so they would have tried some other trick to get it away from the family and into their own hold?
Well, I think that's a wonderful question, and I think we're all privileged a couple of centuries down, with equipped with hindsight to really ponder and wonder if Bakhtiarun Nisa Begum would have succeeded. Through my analysis and through my study, I would have been of the opinion that she would, if she was a he, the succession would not have happened, because quite like the case that was built against Nawab Wajid Ali Shah in 1856, the English East India Company was already building a case against the Nawabship of Surat. And the usurpation of the estates was a matter of time, according to me, and through the research that I've done. So in my opinion, regardless of the gender of Nawab Mir Afzaluddin's offspring, the case for the usurpation of the estates were already being built. Once again, faulty cases, literally, for lack of better expression, pies from the skies, basically. No proof of any wrongdoing. The Nawab dearly loved by his people, very similar to the case of Awadh.
The case of Wajid Ali Shah.
Exactly. But I'd like to talk a little bit about, the very interesting point that you raised, which I've mentioned in my book, is that, Ji Bilkul, this is something, one of the primary reasons why I wrote the book, because as you rightly mentioned, there is so much written about the annexation of Awadh in 1856, vast number of, books written on Tipu Sultan's valiant fight in 1799 and 1800 and Wellesley taking that, so much written about the valiant fight by Jhansi of Rani in 1856, but not much on Surat. In fact, nothing on Surat. And the doctrine of lapse is officially kind of put into law, if you wish, in 1848. The bloodiest affair happens in 1856. But what people didn't realize is that Surat was used as a laboratory to test it out in 1842. So 1842 Surat, 1848 official, 1856 India erupts in revolution, or the Great Uprising as we call it, and the way that they used Surat as a laboratory was to use Bakhtiar-e-Nissa's gender as a way of not accepting her succession, and of course, not accepting Mir Jafar Ali Khan's official adoption as the son and successor. And the hypocrisy of the English East India Company is so apparent, because at that point in time, Victoria is Empress of India, and she's a female. And at the same time, what is really what comes out quite apparent in all the documents that one researches post-colonial, once the English East India Company is kind of taken out of power and colonial India begins, which is 1859 or 1858 onwards, the English actually pass a law that adoption is allowed. So, the entire argument is flawed right from the beginning, because in the beginning they don't accept adoption, and then after 1858 they accept adoption. So, in my opinion, to answer your question succinctly again, I doubt very much if Bakhtiar-e-Nissa's succession would have happened. It was a case that was being built on faulty and weak grounds.
So whatever may have, Surat would have been taken away, and Bombay would have been promoted in any case.
Yes.
And which is, again, the history of India changed so much because of 1856, 1857, the events of Awadh, the events that happened in Delhi in 1857, they changed the history of India. And another thing that, when I was reading your book, and because I've read a lot of Urdu the stories written by Khwaja Hasan Nizami, specifically Beg Baat Ke Aansu, which talk about the fate of the Mughal princes and princesses after the fall of Delhi. And he even, of course, he has a very evocative book on Bahadur Shah Zafar himself, when he talks of, I think it's called Dilli Ke Jame Kun, or The Tears of Delhi, The Lament of Delhi, or The Tears of Delhi. I think it has been translated in English. So when I was reading that, you get that sense of that, there's no, that the British, of course, in the initial years when they come, they try to behave like the Mughals. You have Akhtar Looni, actually, I still think of him as Akhtar Looni. So Akhtar Looni dressing up like a Nawab and, going out in procession on elephants and all. But later on, that sense of differentiation comes where they feel that they are definitely superior, the white man's burden. Yet when you talk of the story of Mir Jafar Ali Khan, when he goes to Surat, he is accepted as an equal, which is not the case that happens to everybody who goes there. That, they may be seen as somebody very exotic, but definitely not somebody who can, be on, how should I say, on first name term, not first name, but anyway, on very good terms with Queen Victoria and Prince Albert. That itself is something that is astonishing to know, that a prince who went from here in the beginning of 1850s, isn't it?
The
Of
first
the first time he goes,
in 1844.
1844. So when he goes there, he is on such good terms with them. So that is something that I found very fascinating. So can you just talk, because I don't know how many of the viewers who are here who read that part of, read your book. So that part I found very fascinating, about him going to Ascot, him hiring a house, you know, the kind of tamasha, or what should I say, जो सारा ताम झाम होता है एक शाही तामझाम, जो वो खाना खाने के लिए बैठते हैं. So all that, can you just, you know, describe that for our viewers? Okay? Especially
Oh.
that part, I was very fascinated by his stay in the hotel and how he would come to eat his dinner every day.
Gee, Zarur, thank you. I think the fascination for exotic India was very much prevalent, particularly in the 1830s and the 1840s. Mir Jafar Ali Khan's departure from India happens in rather, excruciatingly painful conditions, because he's aware that his wife is suffering from, the last stages of tuberculosis. He's got 2 infant daughters, and he's really unaware, whether he's going to make it back or what success he might meet in England. So under the doom and gloom of those dark clouds of despair, he embarks on this journey to England with the visionary thinking behind him, which is to expose the English East India Company on their home turf, because he's convinced that he would not get any justice here. He is also, through his paternal lineage, the ruler of a small principality in Gujarat called Kamadhya, which is actually quite cash rich. And so while Surat has been suffocated by the English East India Company, he's able to pull out some money to take him to England from his paternal estate. And so that's what takes him to Britain. His initial foray into English society is actually, as you rightly pointed out, very well received. There's this exotic Indian who's landed up in Victorian England. He's 26 years old. The British press is very intrigued by his looks rather than his cause that he's bringing to Britain, and so he becomes a sort of specimen, if you wish, of intrigue. And in many ways, because of that intrigue value that is being kind of created around him, he's able to garner a fair amount of PR support, for lack of better expression. And so the British media is very attracted to him. They're always hanging around the hotel. He lands up taking accommodation in the Mivarts Hotel, which is a very prestigious, lodging, and it's in time become the Claridge's, but it was the Mivarts then. It was a hotel where British and European aristocracy landed and stayed. So amongst all of that European aristocracy, you have a brown Indian prince, and obviously because of that, there is a sense of curiosity. So his daily breakfast is written about in the press. His first kind of engagement with scrambled eggs and fried eggs is written about. It's quite hilarious and humorous for someone who's researching a book on this man's actual cause to find these kind of articles. But hey, it's all part of the story. His fortune change, actually, while he's become a specimen for curiosity, the minute the English East India Company realizes that he's actually coming to stake a claim and to oppose their decisions in India, you can sense through the documentation that I researched that there is a coldness that starts setting in. And so the English are actually quite smart in all of this. As long as you're an Indian prince bringing us a sense of exotic Indian robes and turbans and jewels and all of that, we're very happy to write about you. But the minute you start ruffling feathers, and the minute you start actually, articulating a claim which is going against the narrative of the English East India Company, which is actually the representative of the empire, then you see a sense of, restraint and a sense of coldness setting in. But luckily for him, he is invited to the Ascot races, and at the Ascot races, he happens to have a conversation with Prince Albert and Victoria. At this time, Victoria is probably the same age as him. And there were rumors of Victoria having a sense of, real passion for India, wanting to know more about this country that in the future she's going to be empress of, but she's not yet quite the empress of, and she's being represented by a rather, crookish company. So there's a sense of empathy in her, purely in terms of knowing more about this rather exotic land that is literally, seas and oceans away. And so she encounters him at the Ascot, and through his Persian translators, he's given 2 minutes to, kind of put his claim for, kind of talk about the reasons why he's in Britain. But more than Victoria at that point in time, it is Prince Albert who's quite moved. Because, remember, Prince Albert was also the prince of a rather small principality called Kolberg in Germany, and he was married into the British royal family. And while he understands this awful predicament, he's also aware that he can't be overtly being seen as supporting an Indian who's coming to challenge the representatives of empire. So rather discreetly, he introduces Mir Jafar Ali Khan to probably the most powerful lawmaker in Britain, Sir Richard Bethel, who goes on to become the Solicitor General to the Queen. And it is through these interactions that Mir Jafar Ali Khan is able to kind of, navigate the political divide in Britain. He's quite an astute young man, and he realizes that, for whatever it's worth, Britain is also a deeply riven and divided society. There is a voice in Britain, particularly in British nobility, that is against the English East India Company. And it is through these champions of truth that he kind of manages to work his way through and put his case forward.
That is such a fascinating part, that when we think of the East India Company and whatever they were doing in India, we forget that there were so many back in Britain who were against them and who were actually championing the rights of the Indians. And
please carry on.
And I was just saying, and that so many people from here, many of the kings and queens of or the rulers of the Indian principalities did send their representatives to Britain, whether it is Raja Ram Mohan Roy, who's sent by the Mughal emperor, or Azimullah, who's sent by Nana Sahib, and then later Malkai Kishwar goes herself from Awadh to fight for her son. So there are all these people there. And during your research, did you come across their journey, or this thing on a tangent where, any place where the two journeys meet, or where Mir Jafar meets any of them?
Yes, absolutely. So the kind of passage of play that I narrated just a few minutes ago is about Mir Jafar Ali Khan's first visit to Britain, that is 1844. I'm just summarizing it. He basically comes back empty-handed to India because he fails miserably, although he's got the support of Queen Victoria as Solicitor General. He really doesn't get much traction because the political divide is so enmeshed with the narrative of keeping the empire going that you need a lot of money to stay on in England and fight that, and of course articulate that claim in terms of an argument that is legally viable. But he fails miserably, and he returns to India. When he returns to India, he doesn't get justice in India, and in 1853, after 9 years, he returns back to England. And at that point in time, he's completely determined to take the English East India Company to court in Britain. It's the first time that an Indian would be actually suing the English East India Company on their own home turf. And his lawyers advise him not to take the matter into the courts in England, but into the House of Parliament. And this becomes the epicenter of my book in the second part, basically, because it is unheard of that an Indian, and as you rightly mentioned, Rana Appa, that they were people who actually went, to put a claim for Nana Sahib and and a large number of other princes. But Mir Jafar Ali Khan was the only Indian prince there kind of championing his own cause, and was the only one to be able to table a bill in the Houses of Parliament. None of them were able to do that. And I think he was able to do that because he had a head start. He had a head start before them. He had broken into a very kind of special niche of British lawyers who were powerful enough to challenge the East India Company and also, champion his cause in the Houses of Parliament. So when he goes into the House of Commons for the parliamentary session of 1856, he's actually become a symbol of Indian resistance in Britain. And I think that's very important to understand, that he becomes a symbol of Indian resistance in Britain. At the time when 1856 parliamentary sessions open and his bill is tabled as the Nawab of Surat Treaty Bill, the House of Commons is utterly divided. Because don't forget, the East India Company is very powerful and they have their own members of parliament sitting in the Houses of Commons. For example, Sir Vernon Smith is the president of the company, but he's also member of parliament. Sir James Weir Hogg, he's director of the company and he's member of parliament. So and there's a battery, the Duke of Argyll, member of parliament. And there's a battery of these very well-established British gentry that are members of parliament and that are ready to thwart his bill. Anyway, when the bill passes, which is 213 ayes in favor of an Indian and 28 noes, it's the first time that a bill in the House of Parliament was passed in favor of an Indian. It is at that time that Mir Jafar Ali Khan meets the Queen of Awadh. And she seeks him out and she seeks his advice of how she can actually take legal action against the English East India Company, because she's failed twice in getting a meeting with the Queen, Queen Victoria. Finally, she does manage to meet the Queen, but the Queen is exasperated by Mir Jafar Ali Khan's case, and she really can't support anymore. So it is under these circumstances that the Queen of Awadh meets Mir Jafar Ali Khan. She even has dinner with him at his apartment, and they discuss the ramifications of a legal cause, a legal method of suing the English East India Company. He advises her. And he also advises the great-grandson of Tipu Sultan, whose pension had been stopped. And he also advises the Amirs of Sindh, because Sindh had been forcibly annexed as well, because the port of Karachi was there. And we don't really know much about this, but Sindh was annexed forcibly. And the princes of Sindh also landed up in Britain. And they sought out Mir Jafar Ali Khan's advice in championing this cause. But unfortunately, as we know, the Queen of Awadh didn't meet with much success, and it was quite a tragic end for one of her sons, if I'm not mistaken, in Paris.
That's how Rosie Llewellyn's book actually starts, with the journey of Malakai Kishwar. So it's quite a tragic story. And as somebody who's been brought up in Lucknow, Akhtar Pia, as Wajid Ali Shah is known there, is a very, very important part of our lives. And, I often I'm asked, and I say, whatever I have learned of syncretism or plurality, I think a lot of it goes back to Lucknow and the way the Nawabs of Awadh and even the Mughal Badshahs, the way they nurtured their people and the country. And which again brings me to another very, very interesting point, which you've just actually mentioned in passing, that when Mir Jafar Ali goes, he takes with him a copy of the Rubaiyat of Umar Khayyam and the Vedas. So that such a beautiful, beautiful gesture that, like he's going there with these two. Do you think that that kind of syncretism was again nurtured by the Nawabs themselves? And in Surat? What was the kind of, or was this the Kamadia influence of the Sufi influence, or was it the influence of Surat, the Nawabs of Surat themselves?
I think it was a mix of both. I think it was a blend of Surat and Kamadia. Surat, although the Nawabship was Muslim, predominantly the merchants were all Hindus and Jains. The advisors to the Nawabs were all Hindus. And there was this incredible syncretic mix, you're absolutely right, where, in Surat you had Gujarati being spoken, you had Persian being spoken, you had Urdu being spoken, and a very, how would you put it, a very colloquial Urdu, with like, for example, the Urdu that you hear in Hyderabad has a colloquial touch to it. And so the Urdu that you would hear in Surat had a colloquial touch to it. Farsi was the language of court, but Gujarati was the language of business. So you had this incredible syncretic culture that was very vibrant in Surat. They all lived together, they all traded together, and so it gave rise to this fantastic mix. So that was the contribution of Surat as the intellectual tapestry would go to Mir Jafar Ali Khan. But I think the marriage of Omar Khayyam and the Vedas happens for Mir Jafar Ali Khan in his rural principality of Kamadia. And that is the reason, and the reason being because he is descended from, while he is the ruler of a principality, he's also descended from, Hazrat Maudud Chishti, who was the 12th Sufi link of the Chishti Sufi silsila. And his upbringing is under the stewardship of a Sufi called Hasan Shah Pir, who lies buried in Kamadia. And he is the one who gets him to read Omar Khayyam's Rubaiyat. And Omar Khayyam's Rubaiyat to Mir Jafari, not just, the mumblings of someone who likes wine and drink, but it is a far deeper philosophy of someone who's constantly delving within himself to find the marriage between spirituality and science. And so that was the influence that he came under as far as Omar Khayyam was concerned. But the Brahmin Pandits of Kamadia taught him the Vedas. And he actually learned the Vedas along with, the Quran and Omar Khayyam's Rubaiyat. So you see within this incredible man, this churning, this enmeshed, in Urdu there's a word called amezish, which means the mingling of different philosophies in him. So when he goes to Britain, the gifts that he takes are the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam, who also invented the cubic equations in modern day mathematics, and he also takes the Vedas. And the Vedas are, probably the most profound philosophy of man, along with the Upanishads. And that syncretic culture is as a result of his upbringing in his rural principality of Kamadia, where you see this brilliant coming together of these fabulous cultures.
And that is the syncretism that is threatened after 1857. So again, I think comes, that is a common ground on which we both meet, that we are both trying to help document that syncretism and try and bring it back into our lives. Remind people, not bring it back, it's always been in our life, but remind people of what it is and how it can be. Yeah. Because there is no doubt about it that syncretism in India is under threat.
I think the beauty of where you come from, which is northern Hindustan, and if that's okay, we'll talk a little bit about your book now. That for many reasons was that was the nurturing springs of that syncretic culture came from Lucknow and Delhi and all of that particular belt, that entire region. I think I was most fascinated by your book when you mention about Shahjahanabad as this incredible city which has Jain temples, which has other fantastic temples, and then it has this brilliant Jama Masjid, and it's got the Red Fort and all of that. And I think one must not forget that, and correct me if I'm wrong, I could be wrong, that from Jahangir onwards, the Mughal emperors were half Hindus. Anyways,
Yes.
they had Hindu blood in them, roaring through their veins, and they were very proud of it. They took great pride in that. But your book, if I may just come back to that, I think if you could tell us a little bit about, you particularly talk about, well, not you, but you quote in your book that the throne was almost Solomonic-like. It was. So, in any ways, did the Mughals believe that they had the divine right to rule? And the reason I ask you this is because the Safavids of Persia were often taught the Shahnama. And in the Shahnama is a great rendition of the Far. And the Far means the divine right to rule, but only if you are a good ruler. If you aren't a good and compassionate ruler, you can lose the Far. And that's what Firdausi writes in his Shahnameh. So did the Mughals feel that as well? Or, your thoughts?
See, if you go back and read about Akbar, Akbar was very fond of the Shahnama and of the other books that were written, whether it is Dastane Hamza or Amir Hamza, etc. And Shahnama is something that he would hear from the Dastan goes. So it was very much a part of their life and their culture. And if you see paintings, you'll see that all of them are painted with halos around their neck, around their heads. So that
Very
halo on one, on one side, it's signifying their royal lineage, or that they are the sovereign and the ruler. But they call themselves Zille Ilahi, shadow of God on earth.
Sure.
So when you are the shadow of God on earth, obviously you're deriving your power from the divine. So that divine right to rule is something which is very much a part of them, but they also have that kind of respect, because as I've written in the book also, that when the Jama Masjid is made after the Red Fort and the city of Shahjahanabad have been already built. It's started in 1850. And 1650, by which time in 1649, Shah Jahan has come and taken up residence in the Red Fort. So when the member is made, or when the Masjid-e-Jahanuma, as it was known at that time, when Masjid-e-Jahanuma is being made, it's built on a slightly higher terrain than the Red Fort, and the member now has to be higher than the Nashiman-e-Zille Ilahi or the Takht-e-Aurang Shahi, because obviously the anybody who's representing God has to be on a the Imam has to be slightly higher on his member than the king on his throne. So these are things that the respect was there. But yes, definitely. And as far they definitely did derive their power from being the shadow of God on earth. And as far as that Orpheus panel is concerned, it's there. It was, in fact, I've described how it was taken to England, and then brought back to the Red Fort, and again put back over there. Now that has Orpheus, who's playing the harp, and all the animals and the birds and everybody are sitting around him. It's one of the masterpieces of craftsmanship of that time. So when I was reading up on that, I got a reference from Ebba Koch's work, and she's done some wonderful work on Mughal architecture, that this was Shah Jahan's idea of equating himself with Solomon. Because Solomon was, his justice is very famous. He's one of the most famous rulers of in the biblical and the Quranic world. He is a very, very famous prophet and बहुत ही respected prophet है Islam के, and his justice is such के whether it's a lamb or a tiger, they sit together. So this is what
Yes.
they wanted to portray कि हमारे मतलब हमारे रियासत में हमारे सल्तनत में चाहे वो शेर हो चाहे वो भेड़ हो, they can all sit together and they can all hope for justice. This theme of justice is there even in Jahangir's वो जो उनकी वो थी जंजीर अदल थी. So something that they
Yes.
prided themselves on, of being able to give justice to everybody, and that is why probably they ruled for so long.
Wonderful, fantastic. I want to just take a leap forward, and then I'll come back and I'll ask you another question. But I want to leap forward to 1857. And in your book, you talk very passionately about the Jama Masjid becoming a symbol for that moment of, that particular moment when the English storm in and all of that. And then there is a perception after the rebellion is quelled or the mutiny is quelled, that there's a complete slaughter in in northern India, also in Delhi, and the British or the East India Company. You mentioned somewhere in your book that they consider this almost a symbol of a Muslim uprising against them. How do you see that? How do you see that in terms of the Jama Masjid becoming that symbol, for that time?
See that there were many papers written, and it was called a Mohammedan conspiracy because the Basha was a Muslim, and for them it was that he is at the head of he's the nominal head of the Sepoys who are revolting or rebelling against them. So it is definitely a Muslim conspiracy. But again, Jama
According to
Masjid
them.
as a according to them. Yes, according to them. And Jama Masjid is even today the heart of Old Delhi or Shahjahanabad. It's on a slightly higher plinth than the rest of the city.
Oh, really?
It's built on that. It's built on the Bhojla Pahadi. So even
Oh,
today you
wonderful.
can see it from far. When
Yeah.
I live outside Delhi, but when I'm driving to Delhi, that's one of the first things you can see when you are nearing it because it's off the plinth. And
Right.
its steps become very iconic. Even today, when there is a protest or anything, people go there. When there is a function, there is Eid. You must have seen the visuals of thousands coming that can hold about 25,000 people, but I think much more than that go there
Sure.
every year on Eid. So it is sometime in June, I think, that posters are put up on Jama Masjid exhorting the people who come to pray there, the faithful, that why are you fighting against the British? Because the British and you are Ahle Kitab. Now here comes that divide and rule starts very early. Now the
Yes.
Badshah and Bakht Khan, who is the commander-in-chief of the rebel forces, they immediately give orders and those posters are removed overnight. Next
Right.
day, Maulvi Muhammad Bakar, who runs this very popular Delhi Urdu Akhbar, takes out an editorial in which he says कि हम अहले वतन हैं, and this is, do not fall for this. मतलब हम लोग हिंदू एंड मुसलमान हम लोग यहाँ सालों से रह रहे हैं. He quotes and he says हम तो यहाँ 1000 साल से रह रहे हैं, हम अहले वतन हैं और ये हमारी लड़ाई है. And again, now I have read a lot of, when I was translating Dastan-e-Ghadar written by Zahir Dehelvi, which is an eyewitness account of 1850, of the events of the fall of Delhi, the siege of Delhi, the fall of Delhi, and then he continues, he gives his life afterwards also for many years of what happened to him. He, I think, dies in 1900 and something, and he's described his life till then, where all he was a nobleman, he had to run out of Delhi and run away from Delhi, and then, from pillar to post, eventually he comes back, but there is no livelihood here for him, and then he dies in Hyderabad in the end. So when Zahir Dehelvi is also describing it, he also describes a very syncretic Delhi. And when he's saying, in fact, in his book, when he talks of 11th of May के बादशाह जो है वो मुसम्मन बुर्ज में बैठे हैं, वजीफा कर रहे हैं, जब शोर मचता है कि कुछ बागी सिपाही आ गए हैं, तो verse he writes, and he was a poet, उसमें मैं एकदम इस वक्त भूल रही हूँ कि क्या है, but something like that है कि मस्जिद खानका में सलात की आवाज है और देर में ब्राह्मण कर रहे हैं हरी हरी. सो शाहजहानाबाद का तो ये माहौल है कि जहाँ मस्जिद की अजान और मंदिर की घंटियां 7 बज रही होती हैं. So
Yes.
and that fortunately continues even today. और
Wonderful.
जब नेशनल मूवमेंट चल रहा है, स्वामी श्रद्धानंद is given the keys to the Jama Masjid. Sorry, he's keys to वो तो उनका था. At the same time, Kichlu is given the keys to the Golden Temple in Amritsar, and Swami Shraddhanand is invited to address and give the after the Friday prayers. तो वो member से खड़े होके खुतबा देते हैं, and then you have of course people के हिंदू मुसलमान एकता की जय and things like that. So these are it becomes a symbol. Maulana Abul Kalam Azad 1947 में he exhorts the Muslims to stay on in India again from the Jama Masjid.
Yeah.
तो जामा मस्जिद तो बहुत ही तारीखी मस्जिद है, and that is why after 1857 it was confiscated by the British, and it's only after a lot of petitions and it's the saying guarantee is being given by the Muslims that it is returned to them. Same is with another masjid, Fatehpuri Masjid, that is sold off. Not the main part of the masjid, but उसके चारों तरफ जितने उसकी galleries थी, arcade थी, courtyard था, सहन था, all that is sold off. So effectively, that means that you cannot pray in the mosque. But again, that is bought, Darbar se pehle it is bought and given back to the Muslims. So these were, it's eternal fact in history that we use religion to stamp apart. Everybody does it. कोई अच्छे के लिए करता है, कोई गलत इरादे से करता है, लेकिन मजहब का इस्तेमाल सब करते हैं. You have Akbar with his Sulh Kul, where he wants a universal for all his people. He wants there to be, that they should all be treated universally. What is today somewhat the idea of a secular republic that we have today is somewhat similar to what Akbar was doing in Sulh Kul. कि सब बराबर है, सबको एक ही तरह का अदल मिलना चाहिए.
I think there are such wonderful instances of these cultures that still live on. I always try and be an optimist, and I think that's something which in many ways not just keeps a smile on my face, but it makes me excited about the future. And I think in many ways that culture still lives on in Lucknow, in Delhi. I've had the good fortune of spending a lot of time with Muzaffar Ali Saab in Lucknow, and I see that it is still there, and it's there in the language, it's there in the food, it's there in the in the tamiz, in the way people carry themselves, and I think it's heartwarming to see that still very much alive. And during my conversations with him and with many people, I say keep it alive within yourself first, then look everywhere else if it's alive. If it's within you, it can never be alive outside. आपके जी
पिछले this Ramzan, of course, we are under lockdown because of the COVID-19, but for many past Ramzan, about 4 or 5 years, we've been holding interfaith iftars. Then we've been holding Diwali, Milan, and Teej ka Tehwar, etc., where a group of us get together and then we invite others. So interfaith iftar, when we were doing that, we would invite people who had probably never been to iftar or never heard about what Ramzan was, and then we'd sit and discuss about this syncretism, जिसको गंगा जमनी तहजीब कहते हैं, हम लोग उसके बारे में we would talk about it. And because जो अकबर ने, when Akbar got the Ramayana and the Mahabharata translated, one of his major motives was that this kind of distrust comes when you don't know about each other's religion. So that is the first talking point, कि आप एक दूसरे के बारे में पढ़िए, एक दूसरे के बारे में जानिए, बातें करिए, मिलिए. So we grew up in such a atmosphere कि हमारा तो हर वक्त का आना जाना था, मिलना मिलाना था. So हमारे लिए कभी कोई चीज, there was no otherization as far as I was concerned. And I don't think I ever considered myself anything other than a Hindustani. till very recently, when on social media I started getting trolled for writing and being called all kinds of names. Till then, I had no other identity. Today, I have been, several identities have been thrust upon me, which I reject vociferously, because I still think of myself just as a Hindustani.
Well
And
done.
that is what we have to, we have to promote that. We have to talk about that. So
So,
ये हम बहुत जी फरमाइए
नहीं,
फरमाइए
नहीं,
फरमाइए.
I just wanted to, take once again a step back towards 1857, and in your book, when one reads your book, one gets a sense of, um, this reeling loss. Can you take us through? Can you take us through those three iconic moments of Bahadur Shah Zafar's surrender? From the time that he's found in Humayun's tomb when he surrenders, or from the time that he leaves the Red Fort, then the surrender at Humayun's tomb, and then the cold-blooded murder of his son. And talk us through that passage of play, from Shahjahanabad, where the Red Fort is, and then his departure for the tomb of his ancestor, and then the cold-blooded murder of his son.
Achha, before I start that, because we have only, I think, 7-8 minutes left, we will come back for another half an hour. So those who are here, please don't go away. So there is this book that I have translated. There are 4 accounts which I have translated, called under the name of the book City of My Heart. In that, I have translated Khwaja Hasan Nizami's account of 17th of September 1857, where he says that in the evening, Bahadur Shah Zafar, he calls his children, his daughters, and he tells them, he says that I want to leave the Qila because the British are after my life, and if I stay on, तो यहाँ पे बहुत खून खराबा होगा. So to avoid bloodshed, he decides to leave, and he decides to first goes to Hazrat Nizamuddin Aulia's dargah, and he himself was also a Sufi. He had many murids, और उनके अपने जो पीर थे was Kale Saab, and they were all connected with the Chishti Silsila. So he goes there, and there is such a moving description by Khwaja Hasan Nizami, whose Nana was the Sajjada Nashin at that time. And he says, he describes, he says, when my Nana came in, he saw कि आस्थाने में वो बैठे हुए हैं, उनकी दाढ़ी में धूल है, and of course, and he says, and this is the Mughal Basha, and he says कि मैंने 3 वक्त से खाना नहीं खाया है, और मुझे कुछ मतलब कुछ तुम फराहम कर सकते हो. एंड ख्वाजा हसन निजामी के घर, मतलब उनके नाना के घर में भी उस वक्त कुछ ज्यादा नहीं था, एंड ही ब्रिंग्स बेसन की रोटी एंड चटनी विच द बादशाह ईट्स, एंड देन फ्रॉम देयर व्हेन सज्जादा नशीन उनसे कहते हैं जो वहां पे के ख्वाजा साहब के, आप यू स्टे ऑन हियर, एंड ही सेज आई डोंट वांट टू इंडेंजर योर लाइफ बिकॉज़ द ब्रिटिश आर आफ्टर मी, एंड ही गोस टू Humayun's tomb, and he's in Humayun's tomb, which is actually a very well fortified tomb with walls and fortified walls and huge doorways. They could have just closed that and kept themselves in, and they obviously he comes here with his soldiers. He has about 2,000-3,000 people with him. When Major Hudson comes and he negotiates the surrender, Bakht Khan, before that, has already tried to tell Bahadur Shah Zafar, the Basha, कि Huzur, if we leave from here, we can live to fight another day. So don't surrender. Let us go away from here, which Bakht Khan himself does. He leaves from there and goes away. So he advises the Basha to come with him. But there were 2 people who were in cahoots with the British. One is Mirza Ilahi Bakhsh, the other is Rajab Ali, both of whom advise surrender. And the Basha is old. He's 82, 83 years old, bewildered by what's happening. And though there's a beautiful book by Sayyid Mehdi Hasan on Bahadur Shah Zafar, which describes his activities during these 4 months of the siege, where he's seen to be leading the troops, seeing their training, etc., etc. But even then, the Basha is 82, 83 years old. And then he surrenders on the advice of Rajab Ali and Ilahi Bakhsh. He's taken back as a prisoner to his own palace, and he's put inside a house, which a picture of that I think I've given in the book, in one of the houses which were built for the Salatin inside the Qila. and you have the British toasting to the health of the Queen inside the Diwan-e-Khas. So these are images which I wanted to bring up for people so that when they go to Red Fort or Qil'e Mubarak, as it was called, they should understand all the various layers of that place and all the connotations that the Qil'ah held for the Mughals then and for us now. Because even now, on every 15th of August, our Independence Day, the flag of India is hoisted from the Red Fort. So it is a symbol of power. We have 2 minutes remaining. We'll just take this one question that is for you, Moin. Could you speak about Mir Jafar Ali's wife, especially the coexistence of his second wife and his English wife?
Well, timely put question. 2 minutes to go. That I can escape. Well, he did marry a second time once his first wife had died. The question being the overarching question being to have a male heir for the succession for his paternal estate of Kamadia. When he brings Mary Jane Flood back, he does try to marry her, but the British do not allow that to happen. Mary Jane Flood, who's the English actress whom to be fair, he was actually in love with her. And although I'm descended from his son, I have no qualms in saying that he was in love. The only woman that he loved was the English actress. It's the truth. He desperately tries to secure her, but unfortunately, he also tries to kind of orchestrate a friendship between his wife and Mary Jane Flood. It has a very limited lifeline, that friendship, because in no circumstances can a friendship of that nature survive, let alone thrive. And it is unfortunately on his death at the age of 46, when he's poisoned, that Mary Jane Flood is compelled to leave India under enormous pressure from his wife, and she eventually lands up going back to England. She tries to get jobs in theatre. She doesn't really get any, and
so I'm just waiting for Moin to come back. I think he'll be back, ma'am. Name of the book which showed the Zafar's for a month in Red Fort in his journey to... Okay, that is a book that I have translated. It's called City of My Heart. Tell us about Delhi when it was Indraprasth. I'm sorry, I don't have any information about that. So that is not an area of my study. So you would have to go and read about those who write about ancient Indian history. Any other questions you have on Delhi and on Shahjahanabad? Till Moin comes back, I can talk about that. Here we are. Moin has come back, and I think we're just waiting. Yuman, thank you so much for having been with me on this journey throughout. I wish Red Fort has an audio guide in your voice. Thank you so much. Ma'am, please suggest me books. Here we are. So we are back. And in the meantime, somebody has asked me for books to study for UPSC. I think you should study some, Professor Satish Chandra, his books on medieval history, Professor Harbans Mukhya, Professor Irfan Habib. Their books are what you should study for UPSC. So to come back to our discussion, now there was just one question which I wanted to ask. And since that is a subject on which you are going to be writing your next book, do you see a resurgence in Sufism in India or in the world?
I think so, and I think that's a wonderful question. I believe Sufism is the lost voice of compassion. I don't even like closeting Sufism. और मैं पहले से ये आया कर दूं कि मैं कोई आलिम नहीं हूँ. I'm not an alim, but I'm just fond of being of flinging myself into the world of Sufism and learning. I don't by any ways the lost voice of Islam or a religion, or I think it's just the lost voice of compassion. It's the lost voice of pure, unadulterated human love. Not just for human beings, but even love for your world, for the planet, for the earth, for the species that are in this world. The Sufis were one of the first to talk about environment conservation. Lots of people don't know that. Anyways, but to answer your question, is Sufism coming back, and is there a resurgence in it? I think there is a resurgence in the and an interest in Sufism. I think there's a certain sense of Urdu mein kahavat hai shefta aur farefta hona. I mean, people are being charmed and enchanted by Sufism, which is fine. But I think the true rise of Sufism will only happen when we take a deeper dive into Sufism and what it means. I think it is wonderful that more and more people are enjoying Qawwali, and more people are enjoying the Qawwali sessions at Hazrat Nizamuddin Aulia. You go to the Sufi shrine there, you find Hindus, Muslims, Christians. Last year, my wife and I went, and she's European, and we could see that eclectic mix of people. So I think the interest in Sufism, Rana, but just to kind of take a deeper dive in your question, I think there's an interest in Sufism, but I still think that interest needs to go beyond just being at a Qawwali session. I think to really understand what Sufism was, and that's the kind of mind that I am searching for, is the mind of the stalwarts who married spirituality and science. Ibn al-Arabi said the only way to God is through science and prayer. Ibn Sina, wrote enormous amounts of philosophies. He went beyond Aristotle when he came up with the concept of essence and existence. Umar Khayyam believed that the rationality of mathematics and the logic of mathematics could only be understood by self-introspection and by intuition and mysticism. So you see this marriage of spirituality and science that Sufism brought about. So to say that is Sufism coming back, I think there is a sense of being enamored and being charmed by Sufism. Great. And that's the first step, which is wonderful, and that should be always encouraged. But whether Sufism would come back in its effervescence and its effulgence of bringing science, spirituality, and learning of all kinds together, I think that's still some distance away. Yeah.
But we
Sorry,
can live
I took
in
up too much of your time.
No, I said, and we can live in hope, because as you said, it is the lost voice of compassion, and it is a path which teaches us love for everybody. Was Rachita is asking, was debating a practice in Sufism?
Yes, absolutely. And what a beautiful question. Who's asked this question?
Rachita.
What a wonderful question. I have to compliment you for this question. Without debate, Sufism did not exist. They are for my next book. I had the good fortune to go to Spain for my research, and also to Bursa in Turkey and Istanbul for research. The greatest stalwarts of Sufism destroyed each other in debate, and they grew together through debate. Ibn Sina was destroyed by Ibn Rushd, and in terms of philosophy. But Ibn Rushd, even though he destroyed Ibn Sina, in philosophical debate writes at the end that Ibn Sina's mind to actually propel us forward to think is something that must be respected. So the debate in the Sufi circles was infectious. It was all prevalent. You had an enormous amount of debate raging between Ghazali and Ibn Sina. Ghazali also was not a great believer in philosophy. In fact, he wrote a book called The Incoherence of Philosophers because he didn't believe in philosophy and he only believed in mysticism. So even the Sufis were able to debate, to disagree, to agree, to dissent. So yeah, absolutely.
And that's the beauty of any culture where debate thrives. Because only when debate thrives can you go forward. That's the best way for any healthy society to be in. Can
And they
Arsh?
learned, sorry.
No, I was just about to read a question. Arsh Behel
Gee.
has asked, can Sufism be the road to self-discovery or has it been? Yes, and I think Moin will answer it further.
Can you repeat that question for me, please, again?
Can
Can Sufis...
Sufism be the road to self-discovery?
Indeed. Sufism is the esoteric inward journey which one undertakes to understand oneself. Remember, the Sufis, and I'm quoting this from one of the most illuminated minds, Sayyid Athar Abbas Rizvi, who wrote these incredible volumes, Volume 1 and Volume 2, on the history of Sufism in India. And he articulates this brilliantly. He says, for the Sufis, the verses of the Quran were not a law book. Yes, there is the Sharia and yes, there is the law, but the verses of the Quran were always about taking it within, understanding yourself, understanding how do you feel. It was about the qalb, which means the heart. It was not about a rule book of imposition. So yes, to answer your question, it is about the inward journey. It is about understanding yourself in relation to society, in relation to the heavens, in relation to nature, in relation to life and death, in relation to your relationship with your wife, in relation to the relationship that you share with a little garden that you might be watering every evening. It is about that inward journey. It is not about self-imposition.
Paul says it shouldn't be a fad, it should be felt and practiced, and I agree totally with Paul. Yes, these are rules by which we should live by. Zain is asking, where do you see the roads leading to in terms of future of Sufism versus the current halat of the Muslims?
Current halat of the
Muslims.
Might I urge you to please read my book when it comes out, because I inadvertently try and I ask the same question over and over again. I think, and dare I say this, I think the curiosity, in Urdu there's a word called tajassus, which means curiosity. Not curiosity in a flimsy manner, but curiosity to learn, curiosity to innovate, was something which the Sufis propelled forward. Whether it was understanding music and how the notes of music were rooted in mathematics. So you had to understand mathematics to understand how to play brilliant music, how to weave a beautiful safa with carpet. You could not weave a beautiful safa with carpet if you did not know cubic equations, because the dimensionality of each silk woven thread has to be a particular centimeter. So the thirst to learn died, in my opinion, if I may say so, amongst the Muslims. Learn from everyone, learn from everything, learn from the most simplest forms of life. That died. And unless and until that is rejuvenated through the Sufi philosophies, I don't think. Well, I'm still an optimist, but I think a future will be mapped out only once you actually go back and really develop that core thirst to learn. I just want to finish off by saying that for this question, I want to finish off by saying, why did the Sufis not just progress, but why were they an illuminated mind? Because they were able to look at the Upanishads. They were able to look at the Vedas. They were able to understand that these were works that if they understood, they could learn and better themselves. So when you have that kind of a mind, then you become an explorer. When you become an explorer, you become an innovator. When you become an innovator, you push the doors of science and technology. And that is what Sufis did. So yes, I mean, Muslims should go back to that rather than running behind the Wahhabis.
Valentina has a lovely question. She's asking what was the name, the term that he used, tajassus. She says, I might call my daughter that. Curiosity
Very
in
good.
Urdu.
Very good.
So that, Valentina, all the best. I hope you have a daughter and you can name her tajassus. Rachita again has another question. Why was there a decline of Sufism in popular culture from Umrao Jan to the half-hearted attempt in Rockstar? Does Bollywood hold the keys to its revival?
Appa, do you want to answer that, or do you want me to answer that?
You please answer it.
I say, Rachita, I don't want to get into Bollywood and what Bollywood's narrations are. I don't know what Bollywood's narrations are. I'm unaware. When did Sufism start losing its, I won't use the word relevance, but its thrust? When did Sufism start losing its thrust in society? And once again, I'm being a little selfish here, but I'd urge you to read my next book. I've tried to draw a conclusion that happens in the late 17th century. So from the Balkans, which is Eastern Europe, right till Bengal, you had the three most vibrant empires. The Ottomans, who were ruling all the way from Hungary till Iraq. Then you had the Safavids, an incredibly enlightened lot, who were ruling Persia. And then you had the Mughals, who were also very enlightened. So all the way from the Balkans to Bengal, you had these massive land masses being ruled by these empires, predominantly because those rulers, not all of them, but by and large, kept the Sufis close to power and close to social upliftment. So what that basically meant was, when these power and these epicenters were there at the forefront of global power, they had Sufis advising them. Tolerance, love for all. I'm not saying it was all, cuddly and great, but these were the basic bedrocks and cornerstones of these empires. The Ottomans, for example, Istanbul was the city where the persecuted Jews and Christians went to live under the Muslim Sultan, because they were persecuted in Europe. So anyways, there were three events that happened in the late 1600s that changed the course of history. The death or the assassination of the Mughal crown prince, Dara Shikoh, in 1659. He was undoubtedly one of the greatest Sufis, but he was killed. That was in 1659. In 1666, Shah Abbas II, one of the most illuminated Safavid kings, so liberal and so driven by knowledge, died at the age of 35. And in 1683, against the advice of the Sufis, the Ottoman Sultan attacked Vienna, and he lost. So the two deaths of these two enlightened men and the defeat at the walls of Vienna brought these three empires into conflict within themselves, and they began to diminish in power. With that, began to diminish the influence of the Sufi and their courts. And with the demise of these empires, there was, I'm just really, cutting the long story short and going forward, you had a massive power vacuum, which was constantly bridged and filled by various other people. And today, you don't see the Sufis in influential position, let's just put it that way, in influential positions in countries that are predominantly Muslim. There are no Sufis influencing the Saudis. There are no real Sufis influencing, countries, other countries like in Afghanistan. You've got the Taliban there, so they've lost influence, which is terribly, terribly sad.
And to answer one part of her question, Bollywood has helped in popularizing because the Sufi music, or whatever we can call it, Sufi music, qawwalis have become very popular. A.R. Rahman's Kun Fayakun led a lot of people to find out, after all, what does Kun Fayakun mean, and that it's a verse from the Quran which means so be it. So yes, there has been an interest generated in India at least, or I should say the subcontinent, via Bollywood in qawwalis, in finding out what are the meanings, because not everybody just hears them. Coke Studio again has played a big role by the music. Once you start liking the music, if you are a real, what should I say, अगर आप संगीत के रसिया हैं, then you want to go deep into the music and want to understand what is being said. So once you hear Man Kunto Mola, or you hear Kun Fayakun, or any of these qawwalis, Chap Tilak, China, you want to understand. And there are today, thanks to the internet, many websites available from where you can go and understand what is being said, what is being sung, and then dive deeper into the music and into the words and the meanings behind them. So in that way, yes, Bollywood has helped. Yes, all these videos are going on to IGTV, and from there I'll put them onto YouTube. I think it's now about to be 6:30. So we will just have one last question, and after that, I think that we have answered all the questions. Thank you, Moin, for being here. All the best to your coming book, which I am really looking forward to. And before you go, I have one question. Please describe sacred geometry for me. That is what your book is all about.
I think I saw my publisher joining, Priya Kapoor. I don't know if Priya has joined. Priya, if you've joined, please just say hello. And I think Priya would be very unhappy if I revealed all the details of the manuscript now.
Okay.
But I'll tell you a little bit about the story. Well, not the story, but I think there are elements in geometry that were influenced immensely by spirituality, and the ability of a particular pattern, geometric pattern, that has various different shapes, hexagons, polygons, squares, triangles, all enmeshed together in one, was a thought that was a spiritual thought of bringing people together. However different you are, however different of thought you might be, or looks, or religion, in your quest for the infinite, you come together in geometric patterns to surge forward. Those patterns you can see on Humayun's tomb in the stone carvings. You can see that on the mosques in Bursa. You can see that in Samarkand, the Shah-e-Zinda Mosque. And so it is a sacred and spiritual form of geometry that the Sufis mastered. And I hope you will enjoy it when my book comes out.
Inshallah, I'm sure we will. Thank you so much, Moin. It's been such a pleasure talking to you, and I hope we can continue this conversation in person sometime.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Good afternoon.
Hafiz.